All right, so get this.
You send me an article about a comedian interviewing a presidential candidate.
Okay.
And suddenly we're like, whoa, could this actually, like, swing the election?
Right.
Talk about unexpected
Well,
consequences?
it really makes you wonder, like, are we living in a political thriller sometimes?
I know.
Right?
Who knew a podcast could potentially be this influential?
Right. This article's from a Bonnie Boykin Patterson, by the way,
Okay.
from Name of News outlet. And she's diving into this whole Andrew Schulz interview with Donald Trump, the one that's gotten like a ridiculous number of views online.
Yes.
Schulz has a podcast, Flagrant.
Right.
And apparently he was pretty sure.
Trump had zero chance in the election.
Okay.
Until after this interview.
Interesting.
Now he's predicting a landslide.
Wow. That's a pretty big shift.
I know, right?
The article even points out like how much this interview has people talking,
Yeah.
especially with the sheer number of views it got just on YouTube, like 3 million in just 2 days or something. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Schultz's reasoning for this prediction.
Okay.
He's calling it looks on the street, these knowing nods.
He claims to be getting from people.
As if they're silently confirming what he's saying.
Oh, my gosh.
I don't know if I should be impressed or terrified by the confidence.
Right. Talk about unconventional polling methods.
I know, seriously.
But that's what I find so interesting about this whole thing. Is this a sign of a larger disconnect between, polling data, which has been all over the place, and actual public sentiment?
I see what you're saying.
Are people harboring this secret Trump support? They're not willing to vocalize to pollsters, but maybe, just maybe, they're willing to express with a knowing nod to a comedian.
Okay, but seriously, if nods are all it takes to predict elections,
Right.
I need to start paying a lot more attention on my morning commute.
Right.
But in all seriousness, this idea of a silent majority, or at least a silent segment of the population, who are their opinions being reflected in, if not traditional polls?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It feels like it.
And it speaks to, I think, a larger issue in our current political climate, this distrust in these traditional institutions, including polling.
Right.
And so if people feel like their voices aren't being heard or that the polls are rigged or inaccurate, they're going to look for other ways to gauge the political temperature.
And maybe those other ways are as simple as a comedian riffing with a former president.
Maybe so.
Okay, but hold on, because
The article also talks about how this interview is being seen through like wildly different lenses depending on what side of the political spectrum you're on.
oh, absolutely, which is
By
it's a textbook example of confirmation bias, right?
Of course it is.
Trump supporters saw his performance as charismatic, even presidential,
Right.
while his detractors saw it as a train wreck.
Yeah.
It really underscores how, like, our pre-existing beliefs can color our interpretation of events,
Yeah.
even when we're watching the same thing.
Totally. It's like everyone's hearing what they want to hear, not necessarily what's actually being said.
Exactly.
And let's not forget, this interview hasn't just been confined to the world of podcasts and YouTube.
Oh, that's true.
The article mentions how Kamala Harris's campaign even used a clip from it in one of their ads.
Oh, yeah, the one focusing on Trump's comments about Mike Pence,
Yes.
which is wild.
Right.
You've got a presidential candidate's campaign using footage from a comedian's podcast
Oh, no.
to try and sway voters.
It's like uncharted territory.
I know, right?
Absolutely.
It feels very, like,
It really does.
meta in a way.
It speaks to how campaigns are constantly looking for ways to, like, break through the noise and grab people's attention, right?
Right.
In a world that's saturated with information, sometimes the most unexpected content can be the most effective.
For sure. And you don't always know where it's going to come from.
Exactly.
You've got this comedian unintentionally becoming a political pundit based on street nods.
I love that.
I know, right?
That's amazing.
And then you've got actual campaigns using his interview as political fodder.
Yeah, this is why I love these deep dives.
Me too.
You start with one article, and suddenly you're questioning the fabric of reality.
It's true.
Like, what is going on?
It's true. And we're just getting started. This interview is a microcosm of so many fascinating trends.
Yeah.
This whole, like, blurring line between news and entertainment,
Yes.
the power of personality-driven media, and the increasing sophistication of political campaigns in the digital age.
Oh, for sure.
Like,
it's a lot.
It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like campaigns are now, like, watching the same viral videos as the rest of us.
Right.
And, like, figuring out how to work it into their strategy.
It's the ultimate form of cultural jujitsu, isn't it?
Right.
Taking something that already has this momentum
Yeah.
and redirecting it
Totally.
to your advantage.
And if we're talking about momentum, we kind of have to talk about how this interview plays into this larger conversation
Right.
about different interview styles, especially when it comes to political candidates.
Right.
The article mentions how Schulz actually contrasts Trump's interview with some of Kamala Harris's past interviews.
Interesting.
And it's a really interesting comparison.
Okay.
Because Schulz argues that while Harris might excel in more confrontational settings,
Okay.
like say when she's grilling someone in a Senate hearing,
Yeah.
she doesn't seem as comfortable
Right.
in these casual, friendly interviews.
Yeah, it's a different skill set almost.
It is.
Yeah.
Schulz even goes as far as to say that she doesn't seem comfortable being loved publicly.
Oh, wow.
Which I guess is kind of its own bizarre political skill.
Right.
Being able to be both likable and commanding.
Well, because on the one hand,
Yeah.
you want a leader who's relatable,
Right.
someone you could imagine, like, having a beer with.
I was thinking more along the lines of share a plate of nachos with, but I get your point.
Right, exactly. But at the same time, you need that gravitas.
Yeah.
You need that sense of authority.
For sure.
And it can be tricky
Yeah.
to strike that balance.
Yeah.
For politicians, especially in an era where, like, every public appearance is so scrutinized and dissected.
Oh, totally. Especially when you're dealing with someone like Trump who, as the article points out, thrives in this loose, unpredictable setting.
Yes.
It makes me think back to that moment in the interview where Schulz actually laughs in Trump's face.
Oh, yeah.
Which, again, the article points out was interpreted in wildly different ways.
Of course.
Some people saw it as disrespectful.
Yeah.
Others saw it as authentic. Like
Yeah.
a genuine human reaction
Right.
to something absurd.
Well, and that gets back to Schultz's own style as an interviewer.
Right.
Like, he's not a journalist.
Right.
He's a comedian.
Exactly.
And that comes with a very different set of expectations and a different kind of power.
Totally. People aren't expecting hard-hitting journalism from a comedian.
Right.
So it creates this space for a different kind of conversation to happen.
Probably.
One where maybe the guardrails are lowered and you get a more unfiltered glimpse of the person behind the podium.
Which, as we're seeing, can have this ripple effect
Oh, yeah.
far beyond that initial interview.
Totally.
This one conversation, hosted by a comedian, is now shaping election predictions, fueling campaign ads, and causing all of these debates
It's crazy.
about media, politics, and public perception.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it.
I know.
And it all started because you sent me an article
Right.
about a comedian's gut feeling and some mysterious street nods.
And remember, the article itself didn't even mention the election at first.
Right.
It was about Schultz's unexpected reaction.
Right.
This idea that maybe, just maybe, something had shifted in the political landscape without anyone really seeing it coming.
Which I gotta say is a pretty brilliant marketing strategy for a podcast.
Right.
Want to juice your download numbers? Just casually predict the outcome of a presidential election based on vague anecdotal evidence.
There's a reason why everybody's talking about this interview.
That's true.
It's tapped into something whether we like it or not.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating to unpack.
It really is.
Because it's not just about Trump or Schulz or even this particular election.
Right. It's about this larger question of what influences us, what we pay attention to,
Right.
and how we form our opinions in a world where the lines between information, entertainment, and outright speculation are becoming increasingly blurred.
Exactly. It's like we're all just trying to navigate this massive media landscape where the old rules no longer apply.
Right.
And sometimes it takes a comedian with a microphone
Right.
to like hold up a mirror and show us just how strange and unpredictable things have become.
Which I guess brings us back to our original question.
Yeah.
Did a podcast just swing an election?
It's impossible to say for sure.
Right.
But I think the bigger point is that
Yeah.
we're living in a world where that's a question we have to at least consider.
Right.
The power dynamics have shifted. It's not just about who controls the airways or the printing presses anymore.
It's about who's capturing our attention,
Right.
for better or for worse,
Exactly.
and who's able to tap into those anxieties, the
Yeah.
hopes,
Mhm.
and maybe even the sense of humor that's driving our political decisions.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a reminder, I think,
Yeah.
that we, as consumers of all this information,
Yeah.
have a responsibility to be more discerning than ever,
Right.
to question our own biases,
Yes.
to seek out diverse perspectives,
Totally.
and to remember that even the most casual, off-the-cuff conversation
Right.
can have these far-reaching consequences.
So what's the takeaway here?
Are we all doomed to be swayed by cleverly edited sound bites and street nods?
Not necessarily, but this is like a wake-up call to
Yeah.
be more media literate,
Right.
to understand how these different forms of media work, how they influence us,
Right.
how we can become more critical consumers of the information.
Yeah.
Because in a world where everyone has a platform
Right.
and every conversation has the potential to go viral,
Oh, yeah.
it's more important than ever to be active participants in shaping the narratives that are defining our reality.
So next time you're scrolling through your podcast feed,
Right.
maybe don't just hit play on autopilot.
Right.
Take a moment to think.
Yes.
Who's speaking? What are their motivations? How might this be influencing my own perspective?
Exactly, because at the end of the day, the most powerful tool we have in all of this is our own critical thinking.
You heard it here, folks. Engage those brains.
Yes.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has been.
Thanks for joining me as always.
My pleasure. It's always so fascinating to chat with you.